There is a moment that comes quietly, not during prayer, not during a sermon, not when you are trying to be spiritual. It often comes when you are doing nothing at all. You may be lying awake at night, staring into the dark, or sitting alone after a long day, when the noise of the world finally fades, or walking without thinking, your mind heavy with things you never said out loud. And suddenly, without intention, without effort, your heart says a name. Allah. Not spoken by the tongue, not formed as a sentence, just a soft movement inside, like a breath you didn't plan to take. If this has ever happened to you, you know how strange it feels. You don't feel proud. You don't feel accomplished. You feel still and slightly unsettled. You wonder why now. You wonder, where did that come from? You wonder if you should hold on to it, or if touching it too much will make it disappear. Because this is not like regular remembrance. This did not come from effort. You were not counting beads. You were not forcing focus. You were not trying to be close to Allah. And yet, your heart turned on its own. Many people experience this and immediately rush past it. They distract themselves. They open their phone. They shake it off as imagination or emotion. Others cling to it. They analyze it. They replay it. They try to recreate it the next day and feel disappointed when it does not return in the same way. But Ibn Arabi would tell you something very different. He would say, this is not a moment to chase. He would say, this is not a moment to explain. He would say, this is a moment to stop, not stop out of fear, but stop out of reverence. Because when the heart begins to remember Allah on its own, something delicate has happened. Something that does not belong to you. Ibn Arabi taught that the heart is not always awake. Most of the time, it is busy occupied by noise, desire, regret, and survival. But sometimes when the heart grows tired of carrying the world, it becomes quiet enough for something else to enter. And when that happens, the remembrance does not come from you. It passes through you. This is why the moment feels unfamiliar. You were not in control of it. The heart did not ask permission from the mind. It did not wait for the tongue. It simply turned toward its origin. And this is where many people misunderstand the moment. They think it means they have arrived. They think it means they are close. They think it means they are different now. But Ibn Arabi warns, the most dangerous misunderstanding is to believe that a gift is a destination. This moment is not proof of holiness. It is not a sign of superiority. It is not even a promise of consistency. It is an opening. And openings are fragile. If you speak too loudly inside them, they close. If you rush to name them, they shrink. If you let the ego step forward and say, this is mine, the heart tightens again. That is why the instruction is simple but difficult. When your heart says Allah on its own, stop. Do not chase the sweetness. Do not test yourself. Do not demand it return. Just notice. And let gratitude replace curiosity, because the one who awakened the heart does not need your help to keep it awake. The real question is not why this happened. Real question is what kind of heart receives something like this, and what kind of heart knows when to remain silent. And that is where Ibn Arabi takes us next. Ibn Arabi had a way of unsettling the spiritual ego without raising his voice. He did not warn people by frightening them. He warned them by clarifying reality. He taught that not everything that feels spiritual is meant to be held, and not every opening is meant to be entered quickly. According to Ibn Arabi, the most dangerous moment for the seeker is not when the heart is distant from Allah, but when it tastes closeness and assumes ownership of that taste, because the ego is patient. It can wait years without recognition. But when something subtle happens inside the heart, the ego quietly steps forward and says, this means something about me. And that is where the danger begins. In Ibn Arabi's worldview, spiritual states are not rewards for effort. They are trusts placed in the heart. They arrive without warning and leave without explanation. And the moment you begin to measure yourself by them, you lose the very quality that allowed them to arrive. This is why he warned against rushing interpretation. When the heart begins remembering Allah on its own, the mind wants answers immediately. Is this closeness? Is this guidance? Is this a sign that I am changing? But Ibn Arabi would say, if the mind is asking these questions too loudly, it is already standing in the wrong place, because true spiritual openings do not invite commentary. They invite stillness. In everyday life, we do this all the time without realizing it. Think of a moment when someone confides in you something deeply personal. If you interrupt them, analyze their words, or turn the moment into advice, the connection breaks. But if you remain quiet, present, and receptive, the moment deepens on its own. Spiritual states work the same way. They are not lectures. They are whispers. And whispers disappear when the room is noisy. Ibn Arabi emphasized that Allah does not reveal himself to the heart in order to make the servant feel special. He reveals himself in order to empty the servant of self-importance. So if a state produces pride, comparison, or even subtle self-satisfaction, it has already been misunderstood. This is why Ibn Arabi warned his students not to rush toward meaning. Meaning comes later. Protection comes first. The heart that begins to remember Allah on its own is like a newborn. It does not need direction. It does not need exposure. It does not need explanation. It needs safeguarding. Many seekers make the mistake of thinking that intensity equals depth. They chase repetition of the feeling. They test themselves to see if it returns. They feel disappointed when it does not. But Ibn Arabi would say, the state did not leave you. You left the state, because the moment you reached for it, you placed yourself at the center again. True closeness in the Sufi path is not measured by what you feel, but by how little you claim. The more Allah gives, the less the servant speaks, the more the heart opens, the more the ego steps back. And this is why the instruction remains simple and difficult at the same time. Do not rush the moment. Do not label it. Do not build an identity around it. Let it pass through you the way rain passes through soil, quietly, deeply, without noise. If it is meant to return, it will return without your effort. If it is meant to grow, it will grow without your interference. Your task is not to understand what happened. Your task is to remain humble enough that, if Allah chooses to visit the heart again, He finds the door still open. And that door opens only through restraint. This is the discipline. Ibn Arabi insisted on not control, not effort, but reverence, because what comes from Allah does not need to be chased. It needs to be respected. And once this is understood, the heart begins to recognize how and why such moments appear in the first place. That understanding takes us deeper. What surprises most people about this moment is not what it feels like. It is when it arrives. It does not usually come after a period of intense worship. It does not wait for spiritual confidence. And it almost never appears when life feels organized or under control. More often, it comes when you are tired. Not just physically tired, but tired in a way that settles deep inside the chest. Tired of explaining yourself. Tired of carrying expectations. Tired of repeating the same mistakes and pretending they do not affect you. This is important to understand. Ibn Arabi taught that the heart does not open through strength. It opens through exhaustion. As long as the heart believes it can manage on its own, it stays busy. Busy defending itself. Busy justifying itself. Busy distracting itself. But when that effort finally collapses, something else becomes possible. Think about the moments when the heart is most quiet. Late at night, when the world is asleep and there is no one left to impress. After disappointment, when ambition loses its grip. After guilt, when excuses no longer work. In loneliness, when the noise of other voices disappears. It is often in these moments that the heart stops resisting. And when the heart stops resisting, it begins to turn, not because it planned to, not because it deserves to, but because it has nowhere else to go. This is why the experience feels so unexpected. You were not searching for Allah in that moment. You were not even thinking clearly. The heart simply leaned, and in that leaning, the name appeared. Allah, not as a thought, not as a word, but as a presence that felt strangely familiar. Many people describe this moment as soft, but heavy at the same time. There is comfort in it, but also vulnerability, because when the heart turns like this, it is no longer hiding. Ibn Arabi would say that Allah draws near to the heart when the heart stops trying to appear complete. Completion closes the door. Need opens it. This is why those who feel broken often experience this before those who feel confident. The broken heart makes less noise. And in quiet spaces, subtle things can be heard. That is also why this moment often comes after failure, after a sin that left you unsettled instead of satisfied, after a choice that didn't bring peace, after realizing that the world did not give what it promised. The heart begins to sense the truth it always avoided. You were not created for this. Not for the endless cycle of desire and disappointment, not for constant self-construction, not for carrying everything alone. When the heart reaches this realization, it does not argue. It simply turns toward its origin. And this turning is not dramatic. There is no voice from the sky, no sudden clarity about life, no sense of spiritual achievement. Just a quiet inward movement. And that is why it surprises you, because nothing on the outside changes. You are still the same person, still struggling, still imperfect, but something inside has shifted direction. And Ibn Arabi would tell you this shift is not random. It is the heart recognizing its true address. The world exhausted it. The ego could not carry it anymore. And so the heart returned to the only place where it could rest. This is not a reward. It is not a sign that you are better than before. It is mercy meeting honesty. And when this happens, the most important thing is not to dramatize the moment, but to understand its origin. Because once you see why it came, you stop trying to force it. And that understanding opens the door to something even deeper. Let me share with you a story that has been told quietly for years. Not because it is extraordinary, but because it is familiar. There was a man who did not consider himself spiritual. He prayed when he remembered. He repented when guilt became heavy. Some days he felt close to Allah. Other days he avoided thinking about Him altogether. Nothing about his life suggested a turning point. One night, after a long and disappointing day, he sat alone in his room. The house was silent. No one was awake. No one was watching. He was not praying. He was not asking for anything. He was simply tired. Tired of repeating promises to himself. Tired of explaining his failures. Tired of feeling like he was always falling short of who he was supposed to be. As he sat there, his thoughts slowed. And then, without warning, something stirred. Not a sentence. Not a plea. Just a quiet movement in the chest. Allah. The word did not come from his mouth. His lips did not move. It was as if the heart remembered something the mind had forgotten. The moment startled him. He wondered if he imagined it. He wondered if it meant something. He wondered if he should speak, pray, or do more. Instead, he did nothing. The feeling passed, leaving behind a softness he could not explain. Days later, the man mentioned this moment to an older friend, someone known not for sermons, but for listening. The man spoke carefully, almost apologetically. "I don't know why this happened," he said. "I wasn't doing anything right." The older man listened quietly. Then he said something simple. "Do not rush to touch what visited you." The man looked confused. The elder continued, "When the heart speaks before the tongue, it is not asking for your response. It is showing you that it remembers its Lord, even when you forget." The man asked, "Does this mean something is changing?" The elder smiled, not with excitement, but with restraint. It means nothing you can claim, he said. But it means everything you must protect. The man wanted more explanation. He wanted reassurance. He wanted instructions. But the elder said nothing else. Weeks passed. Life did not suddenly improve. Struggles remained. Mistakes still happened. But something subtle shifted. The man noticed he returned to Allah more quickly after slipping. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. He noticed that certain sins felt heavier, not because of punishment, but because they disrupted a quiet connection he did not want to lose. He did not feel proud. He felt careful. Over time, people around him noticed changes he did not announce. He listened more. He reacted less. He became slower to judge, not because he decided to better, but because the heart had found something it did not want to cover again. This is how such moments work. They do not transform a person overnight. They do not erase struggle. They do not grant clarity about the future. They plant a sensitivity, and sensitivity changes behavior quietly. Ibn Arabi would say that when Allah places remembrance in the heart, He does not demand perfection. He invites honesty. The man never spoke about that moment again, not because it disappeared, but because it taught him something important. Some gifts grow only when they are not discussed. Some doors remain open only when they are not crowded. And some moments are meant to be carried silently so that they can change you from the inside. If you have ever experienced something similar, you may understand why such moments are not meant to be explained loudly. They are meant to be lived. And this is where the real caution begins, because not every heart knows how to carry what it has been given. There's a danger more subtle than sin. Ibn Arabi spoke of it carefully, because it hides behind sincerity and wears the language of devotion. It is the moment when the ego steps forward and quietly says, "This happened because of me." Not out loud, not with arrogance, but as a feeling. The heart remembers Allah on its own, and something inside begins to compare. Others struggle. I am changing. This must mean I am closer now. This is where the danger begins, because remembrance that is claimed no longer belongs to the heart. It belongs to the self. Ibn Arabi warned that the ego is most deceptive when it feels spiritual. It does not interrupt worship. It refines it. It does not deny Allah. It places itself beside Him, and this is far more difficult to detect. In everyday life, you can see this easily. Someone experiences a spiritual opening, and without realizing it, their tone changes. They become less patient with those who struggle differently. They grow irritated when others do not understand their perspective. They begin to measure people by how awake or unaware they seem. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet hardening where softness once lived. This is how a gift turns into a burden, because the heart that was softened by remembrance begins to tense again, this time under the weight of identity. Ibn Arabi taught that true remembrance reduces the self. If the self grows larger, the remembrance has been misunderstood. Closeness to Allah does not make you feel above others. It makes you feel exposed, more aware of your own weakness, more conscious of your dependence, more careful with your judgments. If the opposite happens, if the heart becomes quick to label, categorize, or correct, then the ego has already stepped in, and the danger here is not punishment. The danger is replacement. The state does not disappear suddenly. It slowly loses its depth. The sweetness becomes something to chase. The stillness becomes something to recreate. And when it does not return on command, frustration appears. This is why Ibn Arabi insisted on restraint. He taught that when Allah gives something delicate, the servant must respond by becoming smaller, not louder. There is a reason the heart spoke before the tongue, because the tongue brings explanation, and explanation invites ownership. The heart does not explain. It responds. This is why many Sufi teachers advise silence after spiritual openings, not as secrecy, but as protection. The moment you begin narrating the experience to yourself, the mind takes over. And the mind always wants to stand at the center, but remembrance does not tolerate competition, that it thrives in humility. So what should you watch for? Watch your reactions. If you feel gentler toward people, the heart is being guided. If you feel harsher, the ego is interfering. If you feel less concerned with being seen, the remembrance is deepening. If you feel more aware of how you appear, it is weakening. These are not judgments. They are signals. Ibn Arabi never asked the seeker to suppress the ego. He asked the seeker to recognize it, because once recognized, it loses its authority. This is why the instruction remains clear. When the heart says Allah on its own, stop. Do not announce it. Do not claim it. Do not build an identity around it. Let it remain what it was when it arrived, quiet, unnowned, and free of self-congratulation. Because the moment you step aside, something else steps forward, and that is where the real work begins, not in acquiring more experiences, but in protecting the one you were trusted with. That protection requires a different response, and Ibn Arabi's response is not dramatic. It is simple, and it begins with how you live afterward. When Ibn Arabi spoke about responding to spiritual openings, his guidance often disappointed those who wanted techniques. There was no formula, no method to preserve the feeling, no steps to make it return on demand. His response was quieter than that. Live normally. This may sound underwhelming, but it is one of the most difficult instructions on the path. When the heart begins to remember Allah on its own, the instinct is to change something on the outside, to add practices, to withdraw from life, to protect the state by reorganizing everything around it. But Ibn Arabi would say that if a state cannot survive inside ordinary life, it was never meant to last. Because remembrance is not meant to replace your responsibilities. It is meant to accompany them. So the Sufi response is not withdrawal, it is integration. You continue working. You continue caring for people. You continue fulfilling what has been placed in your hands, but you do so with a different weight inside the chest, lighter, more aware. Ibn Arabi taught that Allah places remembrance in the heart, not to remove the servant from the world, but to correct how the servant stands within it. This is why forcing more worship after such a moment can actually be harmful. Not because worship is wrong, but because urgency introduces anxiety, and anxiety brings the self back to the center. Asterisk. The safest response is gratitude without performance. You thank Allah quietly, not with long speeches, not with dramatic promises, just with presence. You allow the heart to soften without demanding that it stay soft forever. This is important. Many people panic. When the feeling fades, they assume they have lost something. They search for the exact moment when it disappeared. They replay the experience, trying to retrieve it. But Ibn Arabi would remind you, what came without effort leaves without explanation. Your task is not to keep the state alive. Your task is to keep the heart honest. Honesty looks simple. You repent without despair when you fall. You return without delay when you forget. You avoid comparing your inner life to others. You do not ask, why am I not feeling what I felt before? You ask, am I still turning back when I slip? That is the measure. Ibn Arabi taught that Allah is not testing your consistency of feeling. He is shaping your consistency of return. This is why the state often disappears when it becomes the focus. Heart cannot chase and receive at the same time. It must remain receptive. Another part of the Sufi response is silence, not isolation, but restraint. You do not announce the experience. You do not seek validation for it. You do not try to convince others of its meaning. Not because it is shameful, but because explanation invites distortion. The Heart understands what the tongue cannot protect. So you carry. The moment the way you carry something fragile. Carefully, without pressure. Without expectation. And slowly, something changes, not in what you feel, but in how you live. You find yourself pausing before reacting. You forgive more quickly. You notice when the heart hardens and soften it again through remembrance. These changes are not dramatic. They are not visible to most people. But Ibn Arabi would say, this is how you know the response is correct. Remembrance moves from experience to orientation. It stops being a moment and becomes a direction. And direction matters more than intensity. This is the heart learning how to walk, not how to feel. And once the heart begins to walk this way, signs appear not as fireworks but as quiet confirmations. Those signs do not announce themselves. They show themselves in how the heart responds when it is tested. Is where we turn next. One of the quiet fears people carry after such an experience is this: what if it wasn't real? What if it was emotion? What if it was imagination? What if it meant nothing at all? Ibn Arabi addressed this fear directly by removing the need for proof. He taught that real inner remembrance does not announce itself through signs. It reveals itself through changes in response. Not what you feel in moments of stillness, but how you react when life presses back in. Because spiritual states can be imitated, but reactions cannot. If the heart has truly begun to remember Allah on its own, certain shifts appear quietly, not immediately. Not dramatically, but steadily. You may notice that after a mistake, you return more quickly. Not with panic, but with awareness. You may notice that some sins no longer satisfy the way they used to. Not because you became strong, but because the heart became sensitive. There is a difference. Strength resists. Sensitivity recoils. And Ibn Arabi taught that sensitivity is closer to guidance than strength. Another sign appears in how you see others. You become slower to judge people's struggles. More patient with inconsistency, both yours and theirs. Not because you excuse wrong, but because you recognize weakness. This is important. If an experience makes you feel morally superior, it is not remembrance. Remembrance reveals how much you still need Allah. Another subtle sign is restlessness, but not the kind that destroys. Peace. This restlessness appears after you drift too far. Heart begins to ache quietly. Sleep becomes lighter. Distraction loses its comfort. This ache is not punishment. It is remembrance pulling you back. Ibn Arabi described this as the heart refusing to be fully occupied by anything other than its origin. Before, you could drift and feel nothing. Now, drifting costs you something. That cost is awareness. And awareness is a form of mercy. Another sign appears in silence. Not emptiness, but stillness. There are moments when you are not thinking about Allah consciously, yet the heart feels oriented. Life continues. Tasks get done. Conversations happen. But underneath, something remains turned. This is not ecstasy. It is alignment. And alignment is far more stable than intensity. Also become less interested in speaking about your inner life. Not because you are hiding, but because words feel unnecessary. Ibn Arabi taught that when a state becomes real, it no longer needs explanation. The tongue steps back. The heart carries the weight quietly, and perhaps the clearest sign of all appears when the heart is tested, when you are wronged, when you are disappointed, when your expectations collapse. If the heart still returns, even slowly, to Allah, then the remembrance is real. Not perfect, not uninterrupted, but alive. This is why Ibn Arabi discouraged people from measuring spirituality through experiences. Experiences come and go. Orientation remains. If your heart keeps turning back without being forced, then nothing more needs to be proven. This turning itself is the sign. Once you stop demanding certainty, something else becomes possible. The heart begins to trust the one who awakened it. And in that trust, remembrance deepens, not as a feeling, but as companionship. This is when the heart no longer asks, "Is this real?" It asks something far simpler. Where else would I go? And that question prepares the heart for a final, understanding one that brings everything into quiet focus. There's a truth that settles gently once. Everything else grows quiet when the heart says, "Aluvin without sound, it is not speaking into emptiness." It is being heard. Ibn Arabi emphasized that Allah is not distant, waiting to be convinced. He is already present, closer than awareness itself. So when remembrance rises in the heart without effort, it is not the beginning of a conversation. It is the continuation of one that never stopped. This understanding changes the weight of the moment. Realize that Allah did not suddenly notice you because your heart remembered Him. Your heart remembered Him because He was already near, and this removes fear. You no longer worry about losing the state. You no longer feel pressure to maintain it, because closeness is not something you hold. It is something you are held within. Many people think Allah responds only to polished prayers, to correct words, to visible effort. But Ibn Arabi taught that the most truthful remembrance is often wordless, a softness, a turning, a surrender without explanation. When the heart says Allah quietly, it is not making a request. It is responding to an invitation. And Allah does not ignore those He invites. This does not mean life becomes easier. Trials remain. Confusion returns. Mistakes still happen. But the relationship changes. You stop feeling alone inside your struggle. Even when you fall, the heart knows where to return. Even when you forget, something pulls you back. This is not control. It is companionship. Ibn Arabi would say that Allah draws some hearts near, not by removing hardship, but by becoming present within it. So if you are walking through difficulty and find the heart remembering Allah without effort, do not ask why the road is hard. Ask why the heart is not abandoned. Because abandonment feels very different. Abandonment feels empty. This does not. This feels watched over, not in judgment, but in care. And this is why Ibn Arabi urged humility after such moments, not because the heart has reached something high, but because it has been allowed to remain close. The servant did not climb, he was carried. And being carried requires trust. If you are experiencing this, even faintly, then know something important. You are not late. You are not forgotten. You are not unseen. Allah does not awaken hearts He intends to ignore. He awakens them because He is already tending to them. Your task is not to analyze the care. It is to remain receptive to it. To return when you drift, to soften when you harden, to listen more than you speak. And if at times the heart grows quiet again, do not panic. Silence does not mean distance. Sometimes it means depth. Sometimes it means the heart is learning how to rest without words. This is where the journey slows, not because it has ended, but because it no longer needs urgency. And as we come to a close, there is one question worth holding, not to answer aloud, but to carry inward. It is the question that remains when the heart has nothing left to prove, and it is the question that brings everything back to stillness. Before you go, pause for a moment and ask yourself quietly, have you ever experienced a time when your heart remembered Allah before you did? Without effort, without words, without planning? If this reflection resonated with you, take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to Voice of Sufism and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss future reflections like this. Invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, only what you feel comfortable sharing. Your reflection may help someone else who is walking a similar inner path. You'll see a few related videos appearing on your screen now. If this journey spoke to you, continue it there. Until next time, Remain gentle with your heart and attentive to its quiet turns.